It is Striketober, and we are very happy to be joined as we continue the show by Yasemin Zahra, who is the Chairwoman of Labor Against Racism and War. Yasemin, thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, Eugene and Rania, thank you for covering this issue, and so much of the mainstream media is not even talking about it.
No, it's our pleasure and our pleasure to have you with us. And I think that's a good place to start because, as you point out, most of the mainstream media is not talking about this. So talk to us about Striketober. How did October get this moniker? What's the scale of what we're looking at in terms of labor activity right now?
Yes, Striketober. I hate hashtags usually, but it just has a zing to it. Striketober, let's go. You guys know the last year and a half in this ongoing global pandemic, it's been absolutely brutal on the poor and working class who've been at the forefront, who've been the most impacted by just a total lack of support and care for those on the front lines. And workers who weren't already on the front lines, they're being forced back into person. And just about every single union across the country since the pandemic started has seen a massive uptick in members joining the union if they weren't already a member, or just turning out to their union meetings en masse, getting more involved in just unprecedented numbers. This has been happening across the country. And that's because workers are scared, they're angry, and they're fed up in a time when we have over 700,000 confirmed deaths in this greedy and profit-driven, economy here in the United States. So just last night, UAW workers at John Deere, which is a Fortune 500 company, huge profitable company, just started their strike. As I mentioned, it's currently the largest strike in the country, about 10,000 workers. 2,000 2,000 CWA nurses in Buffalo are on strike as well. 14,000 Kellogg workers are also out, and you all have covered the mine workers strike extensively here at Breakthrough. So there's also major strike authorization votes happening. 40,000 Kaiser healthcare workers and 60,000 IATSE workers have voted to give their union leadership permission to call for a strike. So that's over 100,000 workers being affected. And, this moment is really unique because we haven't seen this level of strike activity, especially in the private sector, in a really, really long time, really since the 80s.
No, I mean, it really is amazing to see. Go ahead. No, please, Rania.
Sorry, I always do
fine.
that. But
well, as you know, that's the shirt we're going to start selling. Please go ahead, Rania.
I always do that. Rania throws in. So Yasemin, I was really curious about a couple things. One, I live abroad, so I'm not always necessarily following the day-to-day domestic news in the U.S. But I was really impressed because Eugene was kind of like showing me all the strikes happening, and it was like too many to follow. I don't know how common it is. It sounds like this is kind of more strikes than usual, more sort of labor organization and energy than usual. I'm wondering what you think that's about. Is it because we're still in the midst of this pandemic? I know that there's been a lot of articles talking about, everyone's quitting their jobs and they're asking for more, but that kind of seems to be whitewashing. I think something else that might be going on in the labor market right now, and that is, I feel it seems like there's more exploitation of the workforce than there was before. I mean, you see this massive strike, the biggest strike in the country right now is these nurses in Buffalo, I believe it is. So I'm just curious, how do you think the pandemic and the economic fallout of the pandemic and then has kind of changed the way that employees are being treated that might be contributing to more of this sort of upsurge in strikes?
Yeah, great question. The pandemic has had a huge factor in all of this. Workers are seeing, increases in their healthcare premiums, cuts in overtime pay, attacks on their pensions, wages staying stagnant, while executives at some of these companies are raking in record profits for the year, like at John Deere, for example. I mean, workers are just overworked, underpaid, undervalued. There's a very tight labor market right now with increasing inflation. And so it's really impacting those on the ground, and they're fed up. And the other important piece to all of this, I think, is to really understand for your audience is that a lot of their union contracts are expiring around the same time in October. Usually contracts will expire around the end of the month. So, the conditions that this creates is one with labor upheaval, because workers are fed up and they're tired of taking concessions for so long. And we're really, in a golden opportunity right now for labor.
One of the things that I think is important about this moment is, oftentimes we see strikes, they're, at least appear, I think, in the way they're covered to be isolated incidents. And I think what this whole sort of Striketober meme, if you will, hashtag has brought back is the idea not just of labor, sort of in the abstract, but the labor movement as, a whole, not just one union, not just one city, not just one fight. So I wanted to ask you, what are you taking from this, or what do you think people should really know, or how they should frame the role of the labor movement in society as a social force, the role it can play, and why, obviously strikes are important for the individual wages and working conditions of the people there, but looking at this sort of all of it as a whole, what does it say about the role of the labor movement as a social force?
Yeah, first of all, I think we have to talk about how, in this moment that we're in, we have the most pro-union president really ever, maybe even more than FDR in the FDR years. We have a union leader at the head of the Department of Labor. Positive union sentiment is the highest it's ever been in a very, very long time. So right now, workers have so much leverage. We're again in such a critical moment, and this is not a time for labor to sit back and take it easy. It's a time for us to just crank up the heat and win big for working people. And like you said, Eugene, the union is not just about economic struggles, although those struggles are incredibly critical. The union can be a machine for humanity. And the fact of the matter is, workers run the economy. Workers, especially in large strategic sectors, have the power to just bring the whole damn system to a halt. And there's so much power in a union. They're oftentimes the most powerful institutions in a community. Very few organizations have, hundreds of thousands of members. And the workplace is the most common place where workers can really act on their consciousness as a working class. So there's so much that we can do in the labor movement to really impact the lives of both union members, but also non-union members as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, at the outset, of course, we introduced you as the Chairwoman of Labor Against Racism and War, and I wanted to just ask you about that. What do you all do at Labor Against Racism and War, and what's the relationship between the labor movement and the international foreign policy issues here in the U.S.?
Yeah, well, we are, I would say building the next generation of unionists and workers who are just bonded together through the vision of what we know our unions can become. The record-breaking war budgets that take, tens of billions of dollars from our communities, from our members, from the mouths of our children. This money is better directed at, public education, affordable housing, universal health care, and other things that we actually need to survive and to thrive. It's always working people who suffer from these silly wars based on mostly lies, while executives continue to enrich themselves on defense contracts. Nobody, both at home or abroad, working people on both sides, nobody benefits from these interventions. And like you said, wages and benefits are important, but what we always say is it's hard to find good jobs when we're living on a dead planet. And so we have to be internationalists in our worldview, because we know the boss is international and has loyalty to really only profits. Like, there's no country that these executives have loyalty in, and they'll go to any corner of the globe to find whatever measly profit that they can find. And in the same vein, workers and our solidarity needs to go across borders if we actually want to get serious about challenging capital and breaking the boss's power.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me just ask you this before we close. For people who may be watching who are unorganized workers, who are looking at Striketober and they like what they see, what's your message to them?
Yeah, great question. Join a union, organize your workplace, in 2018, and there's, similar trends here to the 2018 educator strikes, where there was a huge surface of strike activity in the public sector. I was organizing teachers at the time, and a lot of people were starting to look at the union who are not members, and really, seeing the union as a vehicle to fight back. And that's what unions are supposed to do. They're supposed to be vehicles for humanity and to protect and help the working class thrive. We know, so much of COVID has exposed a lot of the inequalities in our system, in how much our government has failed to protect the masses of working people, and the wealth divide is just growing deeper. The message I would send to those folks is the labor movement can really build a country that's in the interest of all of society and the planet, rather than to uphold the rule of a tiny handful of bosses and billionaires. Working people have the power and the knowledge to make that change. When we put them at the center, we can win, and the time to act is now.
Well, Yasemin, I really appreciate you giving us some of your time here. I know you have a lot going on. Labor Against Racism War. I hope everyone checks out what y'all are doing. Very important work, but really appreciate you joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you both. Good to see you.